Number 1.
This month's missing persons case is one of the most recent cases we've covered here at the Morbid Library, meaning the information is fresh, the investigation is ongoing, and you may be able to help. So, after allegedly suffering a panic attack, a young woman with dreams of Hollywood vanished onto the streets of Calabasas. The only sign of her came later that day, when her car was found dead on a nearby road. What happened to Elaine Park? Let's explore. Elaine Park was born on September 24, 1996 to her mother Susan and her father, whose name I have been unable to find. She has one brother named Dustin. She attended the Los Angeles County High School for the Arts, demonstrating an interest in and talent for acting that would see her landing small roles in movies such as Crazy Stupid Love and Role Models. In high school, Elaine was on the cheerleading team and eventually achieved the role of cheer squad champion. She was also active in the school's theater program, especially loving musical theater and dance. Personality-wise, those closest to Elaine described her as spirited and friendly. She tended to be outgoing and extroverted, always offering a smile up to her peers at school. Despite this, Elaine did suffer from depression, most prominently seen in the period after her parents' divorce. But she hung on, stuck it out. Elaine was also deeply creative, using fashion, makeup, and tattoos to express herself. At the time of her disappearance, Elaine was around 5'5" tall and weighed around 125 pounds. She had waist-length dark brown hair with blonde tips. She is known to have 4 tattoos. A dagger or knife with vines around it on her right arm, an opening rose on her left shoulder, a cow skull with horns on her left arm, and a moth slightly below the skull, also on her left arm. Photos below are from the Charlie Project's page on Elaine. Elaine has her nose and both ears pierced. She is Korean. On the night of January 27, 2017, Elaine went out with her boyfriend Divine Compier. They saw a movie together before returning to his Calabasas, California home around 1 a.m. The couple had a fairly rocky relationship. It seems from what is publicly known that they were the type of couple that would constantly break up and get back together over and over again. According to Divine, Elaine woke up sometime around 4 a.m., exhibiting symptoms of a panic attack. She was shaking and having trouble breathing. Divine claims she wanted to leave despite his attempts to persuade her to stay. 2 hours later, and I think it's important here to note that no one has accounted for what went down in those 2 hours, apart from Divine saying he was trying to convince her to stay. Elaine was caught on a nearby surveillance camera walking to her car. By all appearances, she was acting normal. She was walking normally, no longer exhibiting panic attack symptoms, not looking angry. When Elaine's family did not hear from her, they tried to file a formal police report. Unfortunately, and infuriatingly, they were turned away. They were told that Elaine was an adult and could disappear if she wanted to. That 48 hours had to pass. Here's the thing, this is an absolutely asinine rule. The first 48 hours of any investigation are the most important, and the police are here telling the family to just go away while they ignore the issue for that crucial window of time. But with no choice, the Park family waited those 48 hours and reported her missing when it was up. The thing is, if you're angry and I'm angry about this, imagine how they feel. I just wanted to take this small moment to address their anger. To validate it. The only real clue in Elaine's disappearance came nearly a week after she was last seen. Her gray Honda Civic was found on the Pacific Coast Highway, abandoned. The keys were in the ignition and the doors were not locked. The lights were left on, which drained the car's battery. All of Elaine's belongings were left in the car, including items of value such as her laptop and cash, along with her driver's license. The only thing that the family has confirmed was not found in the car was Elaine's favorite necklace, a gold necklace with a small E-charm, studded with rhinestones. The Park family has led a relentless crusade in their attempts to find Elaine. They have organized so many civilian searches, they have gathered private donations to provide $140,000 in reward money. In all honesty, they have done 10 times more than the police have done in this case, and that is outright shameful. Now, it is possible that the police are conducting searches and have information that they are holding back for whatever reason, But they should at least keep the family apprised of how the investigation progresses. This is one of those cases where none of the clues add up to any certain theory. There is really no consensus between investigators regarding what happened. Some evidence suggests one thing while other evidence contradicts it. Some people have decided what happened despite this, but I'm mostly at a loss here. Let's go over some of the most commonly touted theories that have popped up around Elaine's case. Whenever an attractive young woman goes missing, there are always those that jump to the conclusion of sex trafficking. I want to make it abundantly clear that I do not believe that to be the case here for a number of reasons. First, sex traffickers tend to lure young women into their trap through a drawn-out process. They get to know their victim, lull them into feeling safe in the relationship, and then use that to manipulate them. Oftentimes, they get their victim addicted to drugs in order to get the victim to rely on them. Of course, this is not always the case, but it is exceedingly rare for a sex trafficker to kidnap someone off the street randomly. Of course, there may be someone that Elaine was acquainted with that was involved in human trafficking, but at this point, there isn't anything that really hints at this theory ringing true. The next theory is very vague and comes up in just about any missing persons case that has any modicum of mystery to it. People love to add high drama to speculation. It's human nature. Basically, the theory goes that Elaine saw something she shouldn't have. Now, this could be something from fraud being committed to a drug deal. The speculation really runs the gamut because, again, there isn't anything pointing to a specific situation Elaine was in. And, again, I don't put any stock in this theory because of that. The idea that Elaine was dealing with a mental health crisis on the night of her disappearance has also come up in online communities. This mostly stems from Divine claiming that Elaine seemed to be having a panic attack prior to leaving his house. It is also known that the young adult period of life, late teens to early 20s, is most often when serious mental health issues surface. However, Elaine did not appear disturbed in the way Divine described on the footage from the CCTV camera, and she had not been known to be suffering from anything other than periodic depression. Of course, it's possible that there was a rapid onset or that Elaine was masking any symptoms, but the chances of that seem so slim that I'm tempted to dismiss this theory outright. Another possibility is Elaine disappeared as the result of a crime of opportunity. I think we can rule robbery out as a possibility, however. Elaine's valuables were left in her car. So is it possible that some maniac came and saw a young girl alone and vulnerable in the early morning hours and made the snap judgment to take her? Sure, it's possible, but the chances of it happening are negligible. So, again, I'm tempted to dismiss it. The fact that Elaine left her license and her money behind also leads me away from the theory that she left of her own accord to either take some time for herself or to start anew. All of this leads me to one theory. It seems to me that someone Elaine knew is responsible for her disappearance. We've ruled out so many possibilities that this is really all we're left with, and Occam's razor points to this as the most likely option as well. Based on looking at the Help Find Elaine Park Facebook page, this is also the theory that the family believes. I know this section always sounds like a broken record, but it's so important to remind readers that every case I cover is unsolved. Any tip, no matter how small, should be reported to the proper authorities. This is doubly true for recent cases such as Elaine's. Leads and tips are harder to follow as time passes. It has been 4 long years since Elaine has disappeared, but the case is not cold. I have to believe that someone knows something. If that someone is you, contact the Glendale Police Department at 818-548-3135. Do the right thing.
Number 2.
On the night of July 24, 2008, Claudette made numerous calls to loved ones, asking to be picked up from the Lincoln Motor Hotel in Winnipeg. She claimed a man was trying to force himself on her, and she felt unsafe. When no one answered her calls, she grew desperate, throwing the man's keys out of the hotel room window and taking off while he looked for them. Walking down the street, Claudette found a payphone, where she made more calls asking to be picked up. Her calls went unanswered. At 6:30 a.m. on July 25, she made one more call to her sister, using a payphone located at the intersection of Selkirk Avenue and King Street. However, her sister was unable to answer the call. 3 days after her last call, Claudette's sister finally received the message. As Claudette had not tried to contact her again and hadn't been seen since she made the call, her sister contacted police, who told her not to worry and that Claudette would turn up in a day or two. Despite what they were told, Claudette's family was worried about her. They continued to urge police toward action as they felt something was wrong. In order to help get law enforcement involved, the chief of Norway House got in touch with Winnipeg police to help facilitate a meeting in order to get an investigation underway. 2 weeks after Claudette was first reported missing, police circulated a press release with her description. Given the lack of information, the release incorrectly stated she had been last seen in the area of Selkirk Avenue and Charles Street, an area known for prostitution. Not long after the press release was shared, police revised the area in which they believed Claudette was last seen, changing it to the Lincoln Motor Hotel, where she had first made her calls for help. While there had been surveillance footage showing her leaving the hotel and heading down the street, given how long it took for investigators to get involved, it had already been recorded over. As she had been at the hotel, police worked on a possible theory she could have left or been taken by a truck driver from Calgary who had been staying there. However, no new information surrounding this theory has been released to the public. In November 2008, Claudette's family put up posters around Winnipeg. They also spoke to the media in the hopes of gathering a group of volunteers to help search for the missing woman. However, when the day came to search, no one other than family members showed up. 2 years after the disappearance, a judge signed off on allowing police access to the phone records from Claudette's phone card. From there, they were able to confirm her movements on the night she went missing. Given the new information, they once again changed the area where Claudette was last seen, finally stating her last known area of contact was on Selkirk Avenue and King Street. In 2012, a joint collaboration between the RCMP and Winnipeg Police was created called Project Devote. The project would create a task force dedicated to investigating missing and murdered people in Manitoba. Claudette's case is one of the many currently being investigated. The family has helped raise a $20,000 reward for information leading to Claudette's whereabouts. Few details about the case have been publicly commented on by law enforcement, as they don't want to compromise the integrity of the investigation. Claudette's family is frustrated over the number of officers who have taken on and abandoned her case. They worry parts of the investigation could be lost due to the number of people handling it. 1. The majority of those who have commented on the case, including those within Claudette's family, believe her to be dead. However, given the lack of evidence or a body, law enforcement has been unable to confirm if Claudette is alive or deceased. 2. Some believe Claudette is alive and being held against her will. Given her history as a prostitute, she could be held captive by human traffickers or by someone she met while on the streets. Claudette's family has held many vigils to help keep her case in the public eye. Matthew is currently raising Patience and Isaiah. Layla is living with Claudette's mother, while Dayton is being raised by grandparents. Claudette's mother spends each summer searching through and digging up ditches in order to try and find her daughter's remains. Bernadette Smith, Claudette's sister, has become a national advocate for missing Indigenous people. She wants the response to their cases to change and to show that missing Indigenous women, in particular, are valued and loved. When Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau launched the first phase of a national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous girls in December 2015, Bernadette was present. Bernadette speaks with officers once a month about her sister's case, but no new information has been released since 2010. In July 2018, a march from Norway House to Winnipeg was done to help raise awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous women. It was the 10th year the march had taken place and marked 10 years since Claudette's disappearance. Her mother was amongst those taking part. Claudette Osborne-Tyo went missing from the intersection of Selkirk Avenue and King Street in Winnipeg, Manitoba on July 25, 2008. She was 21 years old and was last seen wearing pinstripe pants and a black ruffle shirt. At the time of her disappearance, she was 5'43" and weighed approximately 130 pounds. She has light brown hair and hazel eyes, with a scar on her right cheek and along her jawline. Currently, her case is classified as a missing persons. If alive, she would be 31 years old. If you have any information regarding the case, you can contact the Project Devote tip line at 1-888-673-3316.
Number 3.
One day, a teen tells his grandmother that he had an epiphany about himself, and his grandmother responded that they would talk about it later on. Whatever he meant by that was never elaborated on because the following day, he mysteriously vanished. Logan Schiendelman, last seen on May 19, 2016, in Tumwater, Washington. He has not been heard from since. Raised by his maternal grandmother, Logan played football at Tumwater High School. After graduation, he completed his freshman year at Washington State University, 300 miles from home, before dropping out and moving back to live with his grandmother and half-sister. While there, Logan worked multiple jobs, one of which was at his great-aunt's 5-acre farm. His family has described him as a quiet, sensitive young man who became noticeably withdrawn after leaving college. As far as having friends, he had cut ties with the ones he had from high school and did not make any new ones during his time at Washington State University. Growing up, he had no contact from his father's side of the family until shortly before he vanished, where he was the one who reached out and had an emotional meeting with several relatives from that side of the family. Reportedly, he had told them how furious his maternal grandmother would be if she found out that he was seeing them. Around the time he went missing, his grandmother recalled that he had been smoking a lot of marijuana. Also, there was apparent tension between Logan and his half-sister's boyfriend, who had recently moved in with them and whom Logan did not like. After his disappearance, the boyfriend was questioned on it, to which he maintained he knew nothing about and even passed a polygraph. On the morning of May 19, Logan's grandmother recalled seeing how nervous he appeared to be, and this was when he brought an epiphany he had to her. As mentioned earlier, she replied how they would talk about this epiphany later, and that was the last time she spoke with him. The following day, having no idea where her grandson was, his grandmother went looking for him by tracking the pings from his phone. His phone pinged off a tower that was near his mother's home in Olympia, Washington, and so she assumed that he was with her. However, what quickly followed was the beginning of a bizarre series of events and sightings. Despite thinking that her grandson was with his mother, which the latter said later that he wasn't, further activity from his phone during this period indicated he went down Interstate 5 heading south, then back north, before bizarrely going back and forth between north and south multiple times. On the same day, the morning of May 20, while on her way to work, a woman reported seeing Logan with 2 unknown Caucasian men by his car, which she saw parked on the right shoulder of southbound Interstate 5 near exit 95. Later, on her way back from work, she passed that same location and noticed the car, still parked in the same spot as earlier, only this time its hood was up. When asked later about what either man she saw with Logan looked like, she described one of them as being 6 feet tall, having a scrawny build, and thin, straight blonde hair in a bowl cut. She also recalled him wearing a tank top too small on him and jeans too short. The second man she saw, she described him as having shoulder-length blonde hair, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. Unfortunately, she never got a good look at the second man, only seeing him from the side. Below is a police sketch of the first man this witness saw. At 2 p.m. later that same day, 3 different people called 911 to report a car that was drifting across multiple lanes of Interstate 5 between Tumwater and Maytown, near Millepist 92. Bizarrely, it appeared that no one was driving it. The vehicle veered across 3 lanes towards the center lane before hitting the concrete barrier and finally coming to a stop. Another witness, a truck driver, reported seeing a Caucasian man with either brown or red hair jumping out of the passenger side of the car and running towards the thick woods right by the interstate. While the description of this man does not match the earlier one made from the first witness's account, the crashed car, a black 1996 Chrysler Sebring convertible with the Washington license plate number AVJ8434, was confirmed as belonging to Logan. Moreover, his wallet, identification, debit card, $25 in cash, cell phone, car keys, a water bottle, and other belongings were all found inside, along with a grocery sack filled with snacks in the center console. Subsequently, an extensive search took place, covering a 2-mile radius of the woods around the spot where the car was found, which involved helicopters and tracking dogs. Unfortunately, the search turned up no signs of Logan. Oddly, a week after he disappeared, someone at the Olympia Regional Airport checked in on his Facebook page. It later turned out that the post was celebrating an airport check-in from the previous year. It is out of character of Logan to leave without a word, and his disappearance has left his family utterly baffled. Police believe that it's not outside the realm of possibility that Logan may have been suffering from an unknown mental illness at the time he vanished. However, since his whereabouts and fate are still not known, this is mere speculation. The police have also stated that neither any evidence suggesting that foul play is involved nor any suggesting that Logan is still alive have been found. As of 2019, Logan's case remains unsolved. At the time he went missing, Logan was 19 years old and would currently be 22 years old. He is a biracial, African-American Caucasian, male with black hair and brown eyes. He stood at 6'0" and weighed between 150–190 pounds. Typically, he kept his head shaved. He also has a small scar on his left forearm. He was last seen wearing a black windbreaker jacket, jeans, a white shirt and possibly Nike shoes. As for known medical conditions, he is severely allergic to peanuts. For that reason, he is supposed to have an EpiPen on him in case of emergencies, but did not have one on him at the time of his disappearance.
Number 4.
Alexandria Lowitzer was riding the school bus home from school on the afternoon of April 26, 2010 when she called her mother to tell her that she had forgotten her house key. The 16-year-old, who preferred to be called Ali, also asked if it was okay for her to walk to the burger barn where she worked to pick up her paycheck. Her mother, Joanne, told her not to worry about not having her house key as her older brother was still at the house, so the door was unlocked. She did not, however, think it was a good idea for Ali to walk to get her paycheck. Although the burger barn was less than a half-mile from their home in Spring, Texas, Ali had never walked there before. She only recently started working there, and her grandmother had always driven her. It was a short walk, but there were no sidewalks along the main road Ali would have to take to get there. Like most teenagers, Ali could be very persistent. She pleaded with her mother, assuring her that she would be careful. She also wanted to see if there was a possibility of her picking up a shift at the burger barn that night so she could make some extra money. Ali had only been working at the burger barn for 5 weeks, and it was her first job. She liked the idea of being able to make her own spending money. Joanne finally relented, telling Ali to text her if she ended up staying at work, so Joanne would know what time Ali needed a ride home that evening. Ali promised her mother that she would check in with her later. Ali got off the school bus at her normal stop on Low Ridge Road around 3 p.m. The surveillance camera on the bus showed her and 2 male classmates exiting the bus there, then heading off in different directions. The boys went directly to their homes, while Ali turned off Low Ridge Road and headed in the direction of the burger barn, located near the corner of Cypresswood Drive and Treeshwig Road. Her classmates would be the last people to report seeing Ali that day, as she never made it to work and she never returned home. Joanne got home from work around 5:30 p.m. that evening and was surprised to find the house empty. Since she hadn't heard anything from Ali, she had assumed the teenager had simply picked up her paycheck and returned home. She sent her a text message asking if she had been able to pick up a shift at work, but got no response. Assuming that Ali was busy at work and didn't have immediate access to her phone, Joanne wasn't too worried. When she didn't hear back from Ali, she decided to drive to the burger barn at 9 p.m. That was the time that Ali was normally finished working in the evening, but when Joanne went to the restaurant that night, it was already dark and empty. There was no sign of Ali or any other employees. It was apparent that they had already closed up and gone home. Starting to panic, Joanne continued to call Ali's cell phone while driving around the neighborhood trying to think of places where she might be. Ali, though she had a large circle of friends, rarely went to their homes. She preferred to invite friends to her own home, and it was unusual for her to be away from home this late at night. Joanne continued driving around for about an hour, then returned home to look for Ali there. The house was dark and quiet, and Joanne was certain something was wrong. She and Ali's father, John Lowitzer, had recently divorced, but he lived nearby. Joanne called him to see if perhaps he had heard from Ali, but he was as mystified as Joanne. The two of them decided that it was time to get the police involved. John joined Joanne at the house and was there with her when a patrol deputy from the Harris County Constable's office responded to Joanne's 911 call. It was close to midnight when the deputy arrived, and she didn't appear too concerned. She asked a few basic questions about Ali and took a quick look around the teenager's bedroom. She asked John and Joanne if there had been any kind of argument with Ali earlier that day, but Joanne was adamant that everything had been normal. Ali had initially been annoyed that Joanne wouldn't allow her to walk to the burger barn, but Joanne had relented, and Ali had been fine when they ended their conversation that afternoon. The deputy tried to assure the worried parents that Ali was probably just acting like a typical teenager and would likely return shortly. She told them to call the police back in the morning if they still hadn't heard from her. John and Joanne weren't pleased with the flippant attitude of the deputy, but there was little they could do. Ali's brother, Mason, called some of his friends, and they spent the night driving around the area looking for the teenager. Joanne continued calling around to Ali's friends, but no one had seen her since school had ended earlier that day. By 5 a.m., there was still no sign of Ali. Joanne knew that something had to be desperately wrong, and John agreed with her. At 9 a.m., they called the police once again, trying to convince them that the situation was serious. They did not believe that Ali was a runaway, as all of her things were still in her room. The only things she had with her when she got off the school bus had been her cell phone and her backpack. Her purse, money, and all of her clothing and makeup remained in her room at home. John and Joanne were obviously in distress, but police were still not convinced. They believed that Ali was a runaway and would return home when she was ready, and they refused to open a missing person case. Realizing they were wasting their time, Ali's frustrated parents decided to start investigating on their own. After speaking with the school bus company, Joanne learned that each bus was equipped with a video surveillance system. She and John were able to view the footage, which showed that Ali had been on the bus when she had last spoken to her mother, and she had gotten off at her normal bus stop. They noticed that two of her classmates got off at the same bus stop and spoke with them to see if they could recall anything that might have happened after the bus pulled away. The boys explained that they had each headed for home, but Ali had walked off, alone, in the opposite direction. Now that he was certain that Ali had at least started walking in the direction of the burger barn, John drove there and spoke to the manager who had been working the previous afternoon. He told John that he had not seen Ali at all during his shift, and she had not come in to pick up her paycheck, which was still sitting in the office. It appeared that Ali had never made it to the burger barn. Noticing that there was a gas station across the street from the restaurant with a surveillance camera, John went there next and asked to view the footage recorded the previous day. Ali would have had to walk right past the gas station's camera in order to get to the burger barn, but there was no sign of her on the film. This backed up the manager's statement that he hadn't seen Ali the previous day. It was clear that she had never made it to the shopping center where the burger barn was located. Somewhere between the bus stop and the restaurant, Ali had disappeared. Joanne was able to get Ali's phone records, and she learned that she had not been the last person to hear from Ali on the day she went missing. After speaking with her mother at 2:45 p.m., Ali had sent a text to a male friend. She asked him if he wanted to come over later that day if she didn't have to work, but he told her he was busy. John followed up with this friend, but it was clear that he had not had any further contact with Ali after their text message exchange, and he had nothing to do with her disappearance. Ali's phone showed her last location as being right on the outskirts of her own neighborhood, near where she got off the bus. It was as if she had vanished as soon as she turned the corner to start her walk to the burger barn. Unsure what else they could do, and aware that the police were still convinced Ali had run away from home, The family reached out to the Laura Recovery Center, a non-profit group that worked to prevent kidnappings and help recover lost and abducted children. The group made official missing person flyers and helped the family distribute them around the area. The family also offered a $25,000 reward for information leading to the location of Ali. The Laura Recovery Center also helped the family organize large-scale ground searches in the area where Ali was last seen and worked to get the case publicized by the local news media. By the end of May, the case had attracted enough attention that the police were forced to take notice. Harris County Constable deputies had taken the initial report, but the case was now handed over to the Harris County Sheriff's Office. Within hours, there were homicide detectives knocking on Joanne's front door. The family was pleased that the case was finally going to be taken seriously, but it also meant that they themselves would be under a lot of scrutiny. Homicide detectives always start their investigation closest to home. As Ali's father, John, was initially looked at with some suspicion and was interrogated for hours. They also took a hard look at Ali's older brother, Mason, who had been home alone when Ali got off the school bus on the day she disappeared. He was also subject to hours of interrogation. He told police that he had heard the school bus dropping students off, but was adamant that Ali had never come to the house that day. He left to go to work shortly after that and never saw his younger sister. Joanne, John, and Mason were all given polygraph examinations, and detectives determined that each of them were being truthful. Joanne and John were cleared of any involvement in Ali's disappearance. Although Mason passed a polygraph, detectives did not officially clear him as they still couldn't completely account for his whereabouts at the time his sister went missing. Mason has always maintained he had nothing to do with the disappearance, and he was never named a suspect. There was nothing about Ali that indicated she would have run away from home. She had been doing well during her sophomore year at Spring High School, and she was well behaved and never got into any kind of trouble. She played on a softball team, was a Girl Scout, and had been excited about finally being old enough to have a job. She was very artistic, and although she liked to dress in dark clothing with a lot of dark eyeliner, there was nothing dark about her personality. She enjoyed making people laugh and loved to sing in her high school choir. Ali was a very social girl who liked to stay in touch with her friends, but she preferred to do so from the comfort of her own room. Before she went missing, she had used her cell phone frequently, usually sending thousands of text messages a month back and forth with her friends. None of them could imagine Ali simply deciding to run away, and none of her friends have heard from her since she disappeared. Her phone went silent that day, never being used after 2:50 p.m. Joanne and John have been relentless in their quest to find their daughter. Although they had been grateful that police had finally launched a serious investigation to find out what had happened to Ali, they were not going to stop their own investigation. Instead, they hired a private investigator and have continued their search for Ali. The private investigator theorized that Ali had been a victim of human trafficking, and police have considered this as well. Detectives have never found any evidence to indicate that Ali is no longer living. Although her case has been assigned to the homicide department, this was done as a matter of policy as she has been missing with few leads coming in about her location. They continue to search for Ali and believe that there are people who know what happened to her and have the information police need to solve this case. Alexandria Lowitzer was 16 years old when she went missing in 2010. She has blue eyes and brown hair, and at the time of her disappearance she was 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed 145 pounds. She was last seen wearing a white t-shirt, black and white checkered skinny jeans, a gray hooded sweatshirt that zipped up the front, and black sneakers. She was carrying a multicolored checkered backpack and a blue LG cell phone. She had pink braces on her top and bottom teeth, and her nose and ears were pierced. If you have any information about Ali, please call the Harris County Sheriff's Office at 713-221-6000 or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-843-5678.
Number 5.
Investigators had sent away the blood found on the garage floor to be tested. DNA testing confirmed it to be Michael's. A blood splatter expert was called in, as the sheriff had been suspicious over how precise and circular the bloodstains had been. His examination showed the crime scene to have been staged, and the bright color of the blood hinted at the possible presence of an anticoagulant. On March 20, 2017, Becca changed the family's cell phone plan, removing Justin and suspending Michael's service, claiming she needed to save money because she was starting to struggle financially. This was followed in April by her having Michael temporarily declared dead so she could sell his truck and any other property as needed to pay bills. Becca's actions during this time caused friction between her and the family. In May 2017, members of the Chambers family were subjected to polygraph tests. That June, Becca took one as well, where investigators learned she'd had multiple affairs during her marriage to Michael and that the latest one had ended just 5 months before his disappearance. She claimed her husband had been aware of the affairs but had never confronted her about them. She also denied any involvement in his disappearance, and her alleged lover had an alibi for the day. On July 12, 2017, Michael's daughter, Susie, received a message on Facebook from someone claiming his friend had told him where Michael's body was. He called Susie and told her Michael had been killed by more than one person and that Becca and another man had been involved. He gave her an address where he claimed she could find her father's remains. Susie contacted police about the phone call, but they were skeptical about the information, given the man was a convicted felon. They believed him to only be interested in the reward money. However, they still searched the area, but no remains were found. On July 13, 2017, Becca called police and requested a protective order against Justin, who reportedly became irate after coming to the house after hearing rumors his mother had been involved in Michael's disappearance. Both the police and members of Chambers' family admit to finding Becca's request for a protective order out of the ordinary. 2 days later, the family became aware that Michael had legally been declared dead that May. The sheriff's office had signed off on the change, citing Becca's actions as normal because she needed access to Michael's possessions to financially support herself. As the investigation drew on, police followed every lead that was called in. However, nothing ever panned out. Given the lack of evidence, they began to look into theories not involving foul play. One of the theories they began looking into was whether or not Michael staged the crime scene in order to walk away from his life. They further questioned the family and found out from Michael's son-in-law, David, that the missing man had spoken about how easy it would be to disappear, a revelation that shocked police. In October 2017, a cell phone expert was brought in, and Michael's exact route on the day he disappeared was mapped out using his cell phone pings. It was discovered he'd left the house and driven to town via the Lake Tawakoni Bridge, where he stopped for about 10 to 15 minutes. Through talks with the family, it was discovered Michael had a history there, as the family had lived about 5 to 6 miles from the bridge when Michael's sons were adopted. At 2:30 p.m. that day, he went to the location once more. However, that's where the pings stop. Through the cell phone data, they were able to discover he had been traveling around 4 miles an hour, meaning he was probably on a bike, as the speed was too slow for him to have been traveling in a car and too fast for him to have walked. It was found a bike was also missing from the garage. The information gained from Michael's cell phone records caused police to change their theory surrounding his disappearance. Based on the new evidence, they now believe him to have died by suicide on or near his old property. However, they have yet to disclose a motive, given the ongoing nature of the investigation. To try and find Michael's body, investigators organized a massive search of his old property on February 10, 2018. However, after 10 hours of searching, nothing was found. Theory 1: Michael's family and friends believe his disappearance to be the result of foul play. His friends at the Texas Most Wanted believe someone hid in the woods located on his property, killed him and disposed of his cell phone in the lake. Theory 2: police are under the assumption Michael staged his disappearance and died by suicide on March 10, 2017. They corroborate this theory with the newfound cell phone evidence and discussions with family members. However, family and private investigators dispute this, given that the route would have taken Michael through town and over the bridge, which was crawling with construction workers. As well, given the bridge over Lake Tawakoni is only a few feet above the water, it's believed a jump from it would not be fatal. Theory 3. Some online and in the public believe Michael to have staged his disappearance and gone on to create a new life for himself somewhere else. However, there has been no evidence discovered to corroborate this theory. Since his disappearance, Michael's family has opened up about the pain and emotion they've felt at the loss of their loved one. They have also become divided on what happened to him. However, they all believe him to no longer be alive. To help find answers, the family have enlisted the help of private investigators Jane Holmes and Philip Klein. Holmes, specifically, doesn't believe Michael to have killed himself and feels Becca knows more than she's letting on. Upon Michael's death, she would have become the sole beneficiary of his estate and $750,000 pension. She also hasn't spoken with the media or helped in searches for her husband. Michael Chambers went missing from Quinlan, Texas on March 10, 2017. He is described as balding with gray hair. At the time of his disappearance, he was 70 years old, 6'3" and approximately 225 to 250 pounds. If you have any information regarding the case, you can contact the Hunt County Sheriff's Office at 903-453-6800.
Number 6.
October 11, 1993 was like any other day in Chalice. After school, Stephanie and her classmates went to the town's bowling alley for their elementary school bowling league. While there, they bowled 3 games and ordered food. At around 4:45 p.m., the league wrapped up and the children began to head home. One of the mothers who had been at the bowling alley keeping score claims to have seen Stephanie walking away from the building, presumably toward her grandparents' house. Around the same time, Stephanie's friend offered her a ride home, but Stephanie declined, saying she had forgotten her backpack at the high school soccer field. The last time anyone saw Stephanie would be while she was waiting to cross Highway 93 on her way back to school. Stephanie's parents had set her nightly curfew at 5 p.m., so her mother found it suspicious when her daughter didn't arrive home by then on the evening on October 11. By 5:15 p.m., Sandy started to worry, so she called Stephanie's grandmother, Hazel, who hadn't seen her either. The neighborhood boys who were seen playing outside were asked if they'd seen Stephanie, but she hadn't been out with them. When it became clear that no one in the area had seen or heard from Stephanie, Sandy and Hazel began driving around town, but found no sign of her. As it got dark, their worry increased, as the young girl was known for being afraid of the dark. Hazel thought Stephanie might have gone over to a friend's house for a sleepover and had forgotten to inform the family. However, upon contacting those Stephanie had been close to, this idea turned out to be a dead end. Without any sign of her daughter, Sandy drove to the local sheriff's office to report her daughter missing. The time was 8:15 p.m. The sheriff's office began their search immediately upon learning of Stephanie's disappearance. Search and rescue crews were called in, as was the local fire department. Boats, four-wheelers, helicopters, and horses were used to scour the town and surrounding area, and search crews walked around on foot to see if any evidence could be found. When midnight came around and Stephanie still hadn't been found, the search was called off for the night. On October 12, the search was renewed, with over 100 volunteers showing up to help. State and federal law enforcement also became involved, and a photo and description of Stephanie was faxed to both state police and county sheriff's offices across Idaho. One of the first major tips to be called in revolved around an unknown yellow truck parked at the high school. No one in the area recognized the truck, and, given the high school's proximity to the elementary school, it piqued police interest. However, when they went to take a look, the truck was gone, without anyone having taken down its license plate or its make model. Those closest to the Crane family formed Friends of Stephanie and mailed out flyers nationwide, hoping to spread the word about the young girl's disappearance. The flyers reached as far away as California. A search dog was brought in to help trace Stephanie's movements after she was last seen outside the bowling alley. However, it lost her scent after only a few yards. On October 15, another possible vehicle sighting was called into police, this time regarding an unknown blue van seen parked on the shoulder of Highway 93, about a half-mile from the bowling alley, on the same day as Stephanie's disappearance. A convenience store clerk claims to have seen two men fighting nearby. However, police were never able to find the van and, similar to the truck, no license plate or make model had been noted. 4 days after Stephanie's disappearance, police interviewed the children who had been at the bowling alley with her. From their interviews, it was learned that Stephanie might have gone to the high school to watch a soccer practice. It was also noted that many of the children had seen a suspicious man watching them, who was described as Caucasian, standing at 5'10" and 175 pounds, and looked to be about 37 years old. A sketch was made up in the hopes that someone would be able to identify the mystery man. However, it resulted in no new tips. 10 days passed, and no new information came into police. A $50,000 reward was issued in the hopes of garnering new tips, but nothing was called in. Desperate for information, police began canvassing door to door, hoping someone might have seen something suspicious. However, their hopes were low, given it was deer and elk hunting season, and many different hunters and cars had driven through town via Highway 93. Given the lack of information, the Crane family began to feel as if police weren't being completely honest with them about the investigation. So, in 1995, the state's attorney general visited, stating there was no proof a crime had been committed, which angered the family, as Stephanie had no history of running away from home. It's important to note that the local sheriff's office has always treated Stephanie's disappearance as a stranger abduction. Given the lack of information, the case went cold. That is, until 1997, when the Idaho Department of Fish and Game alerted the sheriff's office that a hunter named Keith Hescock was in custody for unlawful possession of wildlife. While in custody, it was discovered he'd been in Chalice during the time of Stephanie's disappearance and had driven a yellow truck similar to the one seen at the local high school. Unfortunately, the truck was never found, and a search of Hescock's residence brought up nothing, so authorities were unable to connect him to the disappearance. In the spring of 2000, police got a lead from an inmate in Napa, Idaho, who claimed a female friend had rented a room in a drifter's apartment back in 1993, where neighbors had heard the screams and cries of a young girl coming from the basement. The female friend had found the drifter's behavior suspicious, especially since he never allowed anyone to enter the basement, so she asked about it, and he responded that he was punishing his daughter for running away. The news unsettled her, a feeling that only grew when she found women's underwear in the drifter's room. This led to her leaving out of fear something might happen to her or her children. Upon learning this information, police began to wonder if the girl locked in the basement could have actually been Stephanie. They began to dig into the drifter's background, learning he'd been charged and convicted of sexual abuse in the third degree, but had never served time due to a plea deal. The drifter was brought in and questioned with a polygraph, which he failed. When told his results, he became irate. A week later, a search warrant was executed on the old apartment, where blood samples and hair fibers were collected. While the lab was unable to determine if the bloodstains were human or animal, the fibers were determined to be human. However, given the lack of a follicle, DNA testing wasn't an option. Hoping to place the drifter in Chalice during the time of Stephanie's disappearance, police showed a photo lineup of potential suspects to a woman who had been working at the bowling alley that night. The woman picked him out, but said she couldn't be 100% certain. The drifter's name has never been released due to the ongoing nature of the case. However, law enforcement believe him to be involved. An arrest hasn't been made due to a lack of evidence. In June 2002, Keith Hescock came onto police radar once more for the kidnapping and rape of a 14-year-old girl. He had left her handcuffed in his house, where she escaped. The police pursued him, leading to a car chase that ended in a police dog being killed, a deputy being shot in the leg, and Hescock dying by suicide. Hescock still remains a person of interest in Stephanie's case. In December 2006, a potential lead was discovered when authorities in Thorn Creek, Idaho, were investigating a man's suicide. He had left a note saying he'd killed himself over information his friend had told him about the abduction, rape and murder of a young girl in Chalice. The FBI and state police were called in to help follow up on the lead. A polygraph was given to the dead man's friend, and cadaver dogs were used to search his property. The man passed the polygraph and the dogs discovered nothing. Police no longer consider him a person of interest. In June 2016, a new round of interviews were conducted with the drifter. A new search of Chalice was also done. However, the results of both have not been publicly released. Theory 1. The prevalent theory held by police and Stephanie's family is that the young girl was abducted by a stranger while waiting to cross Highway 93. Given the lack of evidence and sightings, it's believed her abductor was passing through Chalice as opposed to someone living in the area. While there are many persons of interest in the case, police have not disclosed much information regarding who they believe to have been involved. Theory 2. The Idaho Attorney General implied in his meeting with the Crane family that Stephanie's disappearance could be a runaway case. However, both local police and her family disregard this theory, given a lack of sightings and the fact Stephanie didn't have a history of running away from home. Theory 3. Some believe Stephanie's disappearance might be related to that of 20-year-old Amber Chanel Hoops, who went missing from her grandparents' home in Idaho Falls on September 14, 2001. It's believed Keith Hescock might have been involved in Amber's disappearance, especially as it was discovered his family had lied in order to give him an alibi. Given Hescock's possible involvement in Amber's disappearance, some believe there's more credence given to his possible involvement in Stephanie's. After the disappearance, Stephanie's classmates tried to resume their normal lives, but many found it wasn't the same as before. This was made more so by the fact they weren't allowed near Stephanie's desk. In 1993, the case was highlighted on America's Most Wanted. Following Stephanie's abduction, the residents of Chalice began living in fear that their children might meet the same fate as the young girl. Kids were no longer allowed to walk home alone, and parents picked up their children directly from their classrooms. Stephanie's family was never the same after her disappearance. In 1994, her parents divorced due to the strain the case caused, and Sandy moved to Reno, Nevada, leaving Ben to raise the children on his own. Unfortunately, she passed away in May 1996 due to blood clots in her lungs. In 1998, Ben moved the family to Washington, while Stephanie's grandparents stayed in Chalice. On October 11, 2012, Ben unfortunately passed away of a heart attack on the anniversary of his daughter's disappearance. On September 27, 1994, on the eve of Stephanie's 10th birthday, the residents of Chalice released purple balloons in commemoration. Police are still actively investigating the case and currently have 5 to 10 persons of interest, none of whom are family members. They're re-interviewing people and re-evaluating possible evidence, and each year on Stephanie's birthday release an updated press release about the case. Stephanie Crane went missing from Chalice, Idaho on October 11, 1993. She was 9 years old and was last seen wearing a maroon and white striped hooded sweatshirt with the word GIM printed on the front, maroon sweatpants and white shoes. At the time of her disappearance, she was 4'23" and approximately 65 to 85 pounds. She has curly brown hair and blue eyes, with freckles, a scar near her right eye, and a gap between her upper front teeth. Currently, her case is classified as a non-family abduction. If alive, she would be 33 years old. If you have any information regarding the case, you can contact the Custer County Sheriff's Office at 208-879-2232.
Number 7.
On January 7, 2016, 19-year-old Tyarra vanished from her Webster Road apartment complex after telling her boyfriend and her brother that she was going to meet a friend in the complex. That was the last anyone saw or heard from her. If you are interested to know more about her strange disappearance, and if she has ever been found, we have got you covered. What happened to Tyarra Williams? Tyarra's parents split up when she was around the age of 7. From then on, Tyarra was very close to her mom, Danielle, and her brother. Not much information is prevalent about her bond with her father. She had a vibrant social life in high school and wanted a career in working with children and people with disabilities. In her senior year of high school, Tyarra moved out of her mother's house and went to live in her grandmother's apartment in the Stony Brook apartment complex off Webster Road. Recently, before her disappearance, Tyarra enrolled herself in the Guilford Technical Community College. On January 7, 2016, She went to the college at around 8 a.m. to finalize her enrollment and get her student ID made. Later that evening, at 6 p.m., she went to her mother's house to help her take down Christmas decorations. She spent some time there until her little brother and her boyfriend, Aaron, showed up. At around 8 p.m., the trio went to Tyarra's grandmother's house for dinner. Half an hour later, Tyarra suddenly mentioned that she was going out to meet with a friend called Travis. No one in Tyarra's family recognized this name when asked later. After Tyarra went off to meet Travis, Aaron and her brother went back to his house to play video games. Strangely, Tyarra was not heard from since then. Her phone's GPS showed that she made it to her friend's apartment but was shut off shortly afterward. When Aaron tried to call her at 9:30 p.m., he could not reach her, and the call went directly to voicemail. When Tyarra was still missing the following day, Aaron informed her grandmother and her mother of the situation. Danielle could not recognize the name Travis, and phone calls to Tyarra still went straight to voicemail. Danielle tried to access her daughter's Facebook account and found that Tyarra was messaging an ex-boyfriend recently. After realizing her efforts to find Tyarra were in vain, she reported her daughter missing that night. Is Tyarra Williams still missing? Is she alive or dead? Tyarra Williams is still missing. Hence, it is still unclear if she is alive or deceased. The police, though, say it's still an open investigation, and her family hopes that Tyarra will come back safe. The week Tyarra vanished, 2 other girls went missing in Greensboro, though later it was revealed that the disappearances were unrelated. The police tracked Tyarra's cell phone records and concluded that she did meet her friend at the apartment. Tyarra also had no history of running away, and there were no reported disturbances at her home which might have prompted her to leave. Investigators also interviewed neighbors and carried out a thorough search of the area, but found no leads. Once Danielle told the police about Tyarra contacting her ex-boyfriend, they brought the guy in for questioning. At first, he denied meeting or talking to Tyarra, but when faced with the text evidence, he confessed that he met her on the night she went missing. He said that they had sat and talked in his car for about 30 minutes that night before Tyarra started walking back to her grandmother's apartment. The police searched his car but found no signs of Tyarra. Text messages also corroborated the ex-boyfriend's story. The authorities sought another ex-boyfriend called Tree, who cooperated with the investigation and answered all of the police's questions. Local media was then contacted, and billboards were put up to help find Tyarra. Her family also set up and began running a hotline. A few days after setting up the hotline, a sanitation worker called in and said he had seen someone like Tyarra walking down the street in a disoriented fashion. Another unnamed witness also claimed to have seen Tyarra in Greensboro. Yet, police searches based on these tips came up empty. Numerous other tips came on the helpline, including some that claimed Tyarra was dead, yet none provided the police with a lead. On February 20th, a little more than a month after Tyarra's disappearance, her ex-boyfriend, Tree, was found shot dead in his apartment. The police at first thought this crime had something to do with the missing girl, but later they found out that Tree died after having an altercation with his roommate. The last tip came from a relative who claimed she had seen Tyarra at the DMV in Greensboro, but she saw the person wasn't the missing girl when she called out her name. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children added her to their website and still encourages tips about Tyarra from all over the country. Her uncle, Daryl, also put up a $10,000 reward for any information that will result in Tyarra's safe return. Ever since her disappearance, her mom misses her terribly. Danielle said that it terrified her now to see young girls walking on the streets alone. She vowed that she will never give up on Tyarra and said, "Sometimes I'll see a girl her age walking, and I'll focus on the face. We'll never stop looking."
Number 8.
A 7th grader disappeared one morning while walking to her bus stop, triggering a search that is still going on more than 17 years later. April 29, 2003 started out completely normal, exactly like hundreds of other days had in the East Nashville home of the Tuders family. Deborah Tuders woke up first, getting ready for work in the pre-dawn darkness. When she got out of bed, she had to step over her 13-year-old daughter, Tabitha, who was curled up on the floor at the foot of her parents' bed. Tabitha had her own room and a purple canopy bed she loved. She went to sleep each night in her bed, but more often than not she would wake up in the middle of the night, drag her blanket into her parents' room, and curl up on a makeshift bed of pillows on their floor. It just made her feel secure. It may have been odd, but she wasn't hurting anything, so her parents let her do it. Deborah was used to stepping over her as she got ready for work. It was just another part of the morning routine. Deborah worked as a cook in the cafeteria of a local elementary school and always left home around 6 a.m. to get there on time. Her husband, Bo, was a short-haul trucker for a local lumber company and didn't leave the house until 7 a.m. Each morning, the last thing he did before leaving the house was wake Tabitha up so she could get ready for school. He told her he loved her and would see her that evening. When he left, she was still in her nightgown and somewhat groggy, but assured him she was awake. She needed to catch the bus to Bailey Middle School at 8 a.m., and the bus stop was a 5-minute walk from her home. She would leave each morning at 7:50 a.m. Her mother didn't want her to leave any earlier because she didn't want her to spend any time alone at the bus stop. Leaving at 7:50 a.m. usually meant that there were others already at the stop when Tabitha got there. Tabitha got dressed in a pair of mud jeans and a light blue shirt, then pulled on her white Reebok sneakers. She left her home on Lilliam Street at 7:50 a.m. like she always did, heading for her bus stop a short walk away at the corner of South 14th Street and Boscobel Street. She was carrying a sheet of paper with her, most likely the report card she had proudly brought home for her parents to sign the day before. She had gotten straight A's. When she got close to the first bus stop, just a block from her house, there was no one there, so she headed for the second bus stop another block away. This was a standard safety precaution her mother had taught her, so she would never be lingering on a corner by herself. When Deborah got home from work around 1 p.m., the house was empty. This was normal. Tabitha would usually come home at 4 p.m. When 4 p.m. came and went without Tabitha skipping through the front door, Deborah started to get worried, but figured the bus was just running a few minutes late. As the minutes continued to tick by with no sign of her daughter, Deborah decided to make the 3-block walk down to the bus stop. She checked with a neighbor, but she hadn't seen the teen either. She accompanied Deborah down to the bus stop. It was possible the bus just hadn't dropped her off yet, or maybe she had stopped to chat with a friend and lost track of time. There was no one at the bus stop when Deborah got there, and her concern for her daughter was escalating. Tabitha had never before been late coming home from school. Unsure what to do next, Deborah drove over to the middle school. Although she knew it was unlikely, perhaps Tabitha had some sort of after-school activity and had simply forgotten to let her know ahead of time. That hope was quickly dashed as Deborah found the doors to the school had already been shut and locked. Bo got home from work at 5 p.m. to find that his daughter hadn't come home from school and his wife was in a state of panic. It was a situation no parent is prepared to deal with. He and Deborah drove back to Bailey Middle School and pounded on the locked doors. They were able to get the attention of a janitor who unlocked the door and allowed them into the school. They frantically raced through the empty hallways of the school but found no sign of Tabitha. They did find a teacher, however, and explained to him what was going on. The news he had for them wasn't good. Tabitha hadn't been at school at all that day. Fighting hysteria, Bo and Deborah knew that could only mean one thing. Their daughter had been abducted. The Tudors never believed for a second Tabitha had run away. If she was missing, someone had taken her. Their daughter was not a young teenager trying to act older than her years. She still bought most of her clothes from the children's department. Her room was filled with teddy bears and other stuffed animals, and she had a collection of G-rated movies. She didn't have a huge makeup collection and rarely wore any, except for peach-flavored lip gloss. Tabitha was in 7th grade at Bailey Middle School, where she was well-liked and was an excellent student. She and her best friend would sometimes volunteer to help out in the school library, fighting over who would get to use the electric stapler. The librarian recalled that Tabitha usually won. She never got into any trouble at school, and she seemed to be a happy and well-adjusted teenager with nothing to indicate any problems at home or with friends. About 6 months before she went missing, Tabitha had started attending church with her best friend's family. It was something she decided to do on her own, and she seemed to enjoy it. She loved to sing and joined the church choir and had volunteered at a spaghetti dinner the church held. The Sunday before she went missing, she had received a $20 prize at Sunday school for memorizing the 10 Commandments. Investigators would find the money in her room, untouched. She was also extremely close with her parents, preferring to spend her free time with them. She would go to Saturday night car races with them all the time, cheering on her older brother who was one of the drivers. Often, some of her friends would go with her, but Tabitha went, even if they didn't. She was exceptionally close with her mother, and the two were almost always together. She rarely went anywhere without her mom, but if she did, her mother knew where she was going and when she would be back. If she had been an unreliable child, the fact that she hadn't returned home from school on time may not have been quite so terrifying to her parents. But this was a child who had never spent any extended amount of time away from home. As they left the school that afternoon without their daughter, Bo and Deborah were almost paralyzed with fear. The couple raced home and called the police to report their daughter missing. When an officer responded 45 minutes later, they told him that Tabitha had never done anything like this, and they were absolutely positive that she would not run away from home. The officer wasn't so sure. Tabitha was a 13-year-old girl, and they can often act in unpredictable ways. Even the most obedient child can turn wild once the teenage years hit. Since no one had witnessed an abduction, the case didn't meet the criteria necessary for law enforcement to issue an Amber Alert. But there was no evidence that Tabitha was a runaway either. With nothing to go on one way or another, police launched a search in the neighborhood. They also alerted the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children about Tabitha and called the local news media so they could help get the word out on the evening news that night. Whether they thought Tabitha ran away or not, within the first few hours of the search, more than 100 officers were involved. Nearly a third of the Nashville officers who were on duty at the time responded to the call. Officers began doing a door-to-door search in the neighborhood and searched all empty buildings and businesses in a 2-mile radius. They tried to get a helicopter to assist from the air, but the weather got progressively worse as the night went on, and their helicopters were grounded. Hours passed, and they hadn't found any sign of Tabitha. More than a dozen officers kept searching overnight, hoping to find anything that could point them in the right direction. One of the biggest problems police faced was the time difference between when Tabitha was last seen and when she was reported missing. Since her parents had assumed that she had made it safely to school that morning, it wasn't until the late afternoon that they realized something was wrong. By the time police were called in, Tabitha hadn't been seen in over 10 hours. If she had been abducted, she could have been anywhere in the state by then or in one of 13 other states. It put the investigators at a huge disadvantage. Time is the most critical factor in child abduction cases. Almost 75% of children who are abducted and then murdered are killed within 3 hours of going missing. It is a sobering statistic. 5 detectives were assigned to work on the case full-time. These detectives believed there were people in the community who had useful information but were not coming forward with it. Noting that Tabitha had disappeared on a sunny morning, at a time when kids were waiting at bus stops and parents were driving to work, they urged anyone who may have seen anything even slightly out of the ordinary to call. It seemed impossible that the teen could have been abducted at that time of day without someone noticing. As they continued to interview people, a boy came forward to say he had seen something concerning. The 11-year-old was also a student at Bailey Middle School, and he had been waiting at the bus stop that Tabitha was walking towards. He told detectives that he saw her walking down the hill towards the stop on Boscobel Street. When she was about 30 yards from the bus stop, a red car had pulled over next to her, and she had gotten inside. The car had come from 14th Street and was headed towards 15th Street when it pulled over. After Tabitha got in, the driver, a dark-skinned male wearing a backwards baseball cap, had then turned the car around and headed back up the hill. If true, this was a tip that could potentially solve the case. Yet police said they did not find the boy to be credible, and they hadn't been able to confirm anything he said. Still, if he was correct, He was the last person to see Tabitha before she vanished, and his potential sighting would be reinvestigated numerous times over the years. In the middle of May, Bo and Deborah traveled to New York City to tape a segment for the John Walsh Show. Even though they were only gone for a couple days, Deborah dreaded being away from home. She was terrified that she was going to miss a call from Tabitha and had certainly never envisioned that she would one day be appearing on national television. Still, she knew that the publicity could help bring Tabitha home, and she was gratified when John Walsh said he was certain Tabitha wasn't a runaway. 3 weeks into the disappearance, Metro Police still believed there was a chance that Tabitha was voluntarily missing. Tabitha's friends and family continued to insist that the teen had not run away from home. She had no reason to. She had gotten straight A's on her last report card and had been looking forward to an upcoming class trip to Kentucky Kingdom. The trip went on, as planned, on May 17. Many of Tabitha's classmates wore buttons with her picture on them to honor her when they went. In July, Metro Police added investigators to the case and started using some of their patrol officers to help seek out leads. Deborah Faulkner, the acting police chief, told the media that she was concerned because there wasn't much information coming in about the case. She had been under fire since the beginning of the investigation by people who didn't believe the police department had taken the investigation seriously, and now it looked like the case was going cold. Detectives renewed their effort to identify and track down all registered sex offenders in the area. Beat officers, who did not normally do any independent investigations, started questioning people in the hopes that they could identify potential sightings of the missing girl. People who lived in Tabitha's neighborhood were re-interviewed, with investigators concentrating on those who believed they had seen the young girl as she walked towards the bus stop that morning. On July 15, police announced that they were shifting their focus from a possible runaway case to one of possible foul play. They noted that, while they still did not have any evidence to prove Tabitha had been hurt or abducted, the fact that she had been missing this long with no contact and no confirmed sightings led them to believe that she hadn't left voluntarily. It was what her friends and family had been saying all along. Unfortunately, it brought them no closer to finding Tabitha, and the case grew cold. When the investigation first started, detectives were receiving more than 50 tips a day about the missing girl. A year later, this had slowed to a trickle of only 5 or 6 tips a month. While it was still considered an active investigation, detectives were running out of leads to follow. Knowing that they needed to keep Tabitha's picture out there to ensure the public didn't forget she was missing, her family created Team Tabitha. The teen had adored going to the Saturday night car races at Highland Rim Speedway with her parents. Her brother, Kevin, was one of the race car drivers, and he had loved seeing his little sister there to cheer him on. Now, he and 3 other drivers, Team Tabitha, had large pictures of Tabitha mounted on the hoods of their race cars. They raced the cars every Saturday night, and the racetrack would announce the phone number for the tip line before their races. They were hopeful that this might bring in the tip they needed to crack the case. As time went by with no progress, Tabitha's case slipped out of the headlines. Eventually, it was reduced to a boilerplate article run once each year on the anniversary of her disappearance. The East Nashville neighborhood, where the Tuders lived, underwent a gradual change over the years, bringing new neighbors who had never heard of the missing girl. The little white house on Lillian Street remained the same, however, even as larger, cookie-cutter homes sprang up around it. The large vinyl banner with Tabitha's picture remained on the front porch, even if those walking by never met the young girl featured on it. Life went on around them, but the Tudors remained frozen in time, unable to move forward without knowing what had happened to their daughter. Detectives still worked any leads that came in, and as the 5-year anniversary of the disappearance grew near, they decided to work with the media to see if they could draw in any new tips. They asked the local newspapers and news stations to feature the case, and the media was more than happy to help. While there was no new information to report, they ran large articles rehashing the case from the beginning and included phone numbers for people to call if they had any information. The media coverage did lead to a surge in tips, and detectives followed up on all of them. Many concerned angles that they had already pursued, but one lead appeared to be especially promising. In the years since Tabitha disappeared, one of her cousins had opened up a tattoo parlor. She was working there when a male customer made several interesting comments about the case. He claimed that he had been on Boscobel Street the morning Tabitha went missing, and he had seen her get into a car. His story was very similar to what the young boy at the bus stop claimed to see, with one significant difference: this man insisted the car was green, not red as the recent article had said. If true, this was a stunning revelation, but police were confused as to why the man had never bothered to come forward before. They took the lead as far as they could, but were unable to find any information linking Tabitha and the car. Around the 7th anniversary of the disappearance, the FBI announced that they were offering a $25,000 reward for information that would lead to finding Tabitha. They were hopeful that the large reward would be enough to entice anyone who had information to finally come forward. They firmly believed there were people who were withholding information, and they knew that money could be a very powerful motivator. 8 teams consisting of FBI agents and Metro Police detectives also went door to door in the area, speaking with residents and handing out flyers with Tabitha's picture as well as the new reward information. An age-progressed picture of Tabitha was also released to give people an idea of what she might have looked like as a 20-year-old woman. Despite the renewed push for information, Tabitha's case remained cold. Though there were still occasional sightings reported, Bo and Deborah no longer got their hopes up when they heard about one. There had been a possible sighting reported in Nevada in 2010, and the girl looked so much like Tabitha that their family asked to have a DNA test done. Unfortunately, the test ruled the girl out. She was not Tabitha. In 2015, police received a tip that Tabitha was living in Nebraska. The information given over the phone sounded promising enough that investigators were sent to check it out, but they returned empty-handed. It would later be determined that the call had been a hoax, originating in a different country. In April 2016, the FBI announced that they were doubling the reward offered in Tabitha's case. Unfortunately, not even the prospect of $50,000 was enough to bring in the information needed to solve the case. Recently, police announced that it was possible Tabitha was forced into the sex trade after being abducted. Still, they believe it's possible she is still alive out there somewhere and are still working to bring her home. It's very likely there are people out there with the information needed to close this case, and police would love to hear from them. The Metro Police Department and the FBI are still actively searching for Tabitha Tuders, and there is currently a $50,000 reward for information that leads to the resolution of her case. Tabitha has been missing since April 29, 2003. She was 13 years old, with blonde hair and blue eyes, stood about 5 feet tall, and weighed 90 to 100 pounds. When last seen, she was wearing a pair of Mud brand blue jeans and light blue shirt and white Reebok sneakers, and she was carrying her report card. If you have any information regarding Tabitha, please call Metro Nashville Police Department Detective Stephen Jolly at 615-862-7843.